Welcome once again to the Renewable Roundup podcast from Schneider Electric. I'm Russell Redding, Head of Energy Markets here at Zygo. Each week, I aim to bring you top stories, critical climate topics, insights, and expert voices. So please do hit the subscribe button and don't miss a thing. This week, I'm pleased to be joined by Pascal Olin of Alight. After last time we talked, I got lots of questions asking for more information. So Pascal agreed to come and, talk about some of those and dive deeper into the topic of on-site solar. Ready? Let's listen on. Hello, Pascal. Welcome back and thanks for joining me again. How are you today?
I'm good, and thanks for having me again.
Oh no, it was great last time, and I'm looking forward to having a bit of fun and talking about on-site again today. Before we delve into that, would you just like to give a bit of an introduction to you and Alight for people who either, like me, listen to the other one and then just forget all those things, or maybe just haven't heard the last one we did?
Of course. So my name is Pascal Olin, and I work for a company called Alight. Alight is an independent power producer. So we in the Nordics are doing grid-connected PPAs, solar and storage. And for the purpose of this episode, we have been doing on-site behind-the-meter PPAs for more than 10 years now. And myself, I joined 6 years ago and have done projects in 5 countries. So on-site solar projects in 5 countries, roof, ground mount, carports, and seen a lot of good and bad projects.
Excellent, and that's why I'm glad you're here, because we're going to try and get the benefit of some of that experience for people who are listening today. So thanks again. We've had quite a few people reaching out, asking questions, particularly kind of wanting to delve into a bit more of the detail. So I think we'll get to that. But so we can start, if you like, from the beginning, just to recap a bit. Do you want to just give me a view about how you feel the kind of key differences between on-site and off-site, where they lie?
Yeah, definitely. And even if we should start with the why we do on-site to start with, which I think is always good to remind, and when we work with large Fortune 500s, but it goes back to the savings aspect, and compared to offsite, right? On-site solar and storage, they offset sort of both the commodity and non-commodity. And now we see with the reduction of costs in storage, we see that you can sort of cover more of your load with solar and storage. So I think that's why it's been particularly hot now. And with the topic of resilience, I think a lot of corporates are now looking at on-site solar and how it can sort of create value. So that's just, yeah.
Yes, it's a good time, and I tell this story probably more often than I should, but you can remember a time when the energy was the major part of the bill, and then you start adding in network charges, particularly now, because suddenly someone's realized we need to start massively investing in our networks across Europe, and to be fair, in the US. Policy charges, levies, green charges, sort of use of system security type charges, and suddenly you just, like, the energy is just this bit sat in the corner, a bit like me on a party, just sat there on its own, not the major part of the bill anymore. So you can completely see why offsite, import and offsite obviously have all those charges, and as you say, the onsite, you're not importing anything because you're generating it on site. So I guess it makes a lot of sense because the commercials are even better.
Definitely. But then to your question about, I think there are also a lot of similarities. So both parties want a good deal, and you're looking for stable, bankable counterparts. It's about managing risk. And I think the biggest difference with an on-site is the obvious one. It's right in front of us. For on-site solar, there is one site, one sort of load profile, one customer, and one developer. And that is what makes the difference. It's just that it has a lot of implications. And I think our philosophy is a successful project. It has that sort of mutual sort of dependence, and you need to sort of balance those risks between each other to reach sort of a good situation and ultimately savings for the corporate. And as an example, there's less of flexibility. For example, as you said, you don't really need to inject sort of excess to the grid, so the volatile commodity is less important. Typically, you don't have a merchant tail to bet on from a developer's perspective. You know, if you do an on-site PPA for 15 years, that's basically the project, and that's good and bad, but that's where you have the whole value. Then obviously there's more value afterwards, and we can dwell into how that is commercially arranged. But that sort of one project, one customer, one developer creates a few new risks maybe that you would want to address.
Yes, and it's interesting because I think when I kind of imagined the differences, having seen a lot of offsite PPAs, I kind of there's a whole thing about communication and trying to make the deal work, and there's flex here and pushing and what have you. Not to say that you don't have to kind of work together and solve issues, but I'd imagine that when you're doing on-site, maybe it feels a bit more like what you, forgive me, but a traditional kind of project. But actually, that project needs to be a really tight partnership, able to solve any problems if they arise, but ultimately really making sure that all the stakeholders are identified in at the beginning, so that there's no kind of nasty surprises, because it's kind of like it's a much more, I won't say physical, but it's much more physical project, because it's am I right in saying there's a dynamic, because you've got someone owns the roof and someone's got a developer working on the site, which is very different to perhaps how anyone's ever procured energy before.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are a few areas which we can dive into and where we see some major differences. And stakeholder engagement is important in an offsite. It is equally important in an onsite. I think the main difference here is the stakeholder group is actually a bit wider. So again, it goes back to this obvious sort of difference in the beginning, but in order to have a successful project, you need to involve the plant manager, you need to involve the people that work with health and safety, risk management at site. You need to understand how to electrically connect to the infrastructure, and you need to ensure that that business case sort of works on a group level and central level. So to summarize that aspect, I think it's you have both a central team very often that manages the PPA, and then you have a local group of stakeholders that is also as important, and getting those two together early on often makes for a successful project. They might also have different risks. I mean, people at site, obviously for the right reasons, risk health and safety, but also, are we going to impact their operations in any way, or rather, how do you make sure you do not interrupt my operations at any time during construction and operations? And this is slightly different, because if you have a virtual PPA, then there's no electrical connection.
Yeah, it reminds me that kind of difference between, for me, from my history working on energy supply, where maybe there's a procurement team or a procurement manager, whatever, and maybe like the sustainability team, but the electrons through the meter are the electrons through the meter. They're working almost on a commercial basis for a utility. And then I worked on demand side management, which obviously might require load management kit on site, like relays and computers and stuff. And it's that whole, as you quite rightly said, getting the people on site on board, comfortable with what you're going to do, happy that it's not going to make their life harder or break their process or anything like that. And then, of course, there's the process of doing it, which, to be fair, I found was more of it starts with a communication exercise. Tell me what you need me to do to work on your site. It's this, right? We do that. Are you happy for us to do that? Yes, we've got supervisors and all these kind of things. Those are the kind of things they do every day, so they fall back almost into their normal kind of that's what we do. When people come to work on site. But I guess you'll have seen a lot of these, both good and bad, in your experience. Do you have any examples you might be able to sort of share?
Yes, sure. And also just saying, most of the time, local plant sort of stakeholders are positive towards solar. It's more that you need to ensure that you do it the way the site operates. But I think
I would say protective about their health and safety record and their site and their production record, but obviously very positive about what you're doing. They just want you to work with them how they need you to work, if that makes sense. Oh, that would be my
I agree. No, and I think again, I have many examples of good and bad, and I think it also comes to the fact that this circle of stakeholders, which I mentioned, gets wider. And I think if we talk about sort of risk engineer and insurances, which is a sort of a important and good topic. So in one project that sort of they were looking and quite advanced in collecting designs, etc. They hadn't engaged properly with their risk engineer, which meant that they had to up to date the requirement as we went along. And that sort of led to redesigns, which led to cost increase, which ultimately just is a delay, and delay often in our world is not a good thing. So, even though we sort of pushed for that, I think it's worth doing early on to get those requirements up front and validate before you start looking at different specs, because also depending on different developers how experienced they are, they might actually have different designs which might cost differently, but in the end only one of them will be valid. And in a very sort of extreme scenario, we also have seen a project that gone all the way with almost with a negotiated agreement, but actually the tilt of the roof was off a few degrees, and the insurance company ultimately just did not allow the project to be built with those specifications. So it's one of a few new stakeholders that you need to involve, and in that sense, if you miss them, you can have a lot of delays, and worst cases it won't happen. On the flip side, you have some corporates that do take this upon them very seriously and do a bit of work up front, which helps developers to do the right design and ultimately help both parties, because you have a valid solution and you have ability to see different offers. So I've seen both, but around risk and insurance is very common topic.
It's interesting because I suppose as well as behind the meter being a kind of unique proposition as itself, each site is going to be like sort of unique. So if you wait, each job is going to be unique. So I guess it's important to kind of understand that and how you deal with that.
Yes. Ultimately, each factory, of course, operates in their unique way, and the experienced developer will understand that. Then, with that said, there are design principles and ways of working that for corporates that will apply for many of those sites. So again, and we can talk about that later, how you make it successful, but it's about replicating that. But so I think it's also worth, if you're planning to do on site, it's worth spending that time up front, understanding your technical feasibility, and then you multiply that with your sites. And that's also part of on-site. A Fortune 500 company might have 20 sites in Europe. Some of them are bound to not be technically feasible because they might have been built during a time where roof load was different. Then it's more important that you understand that early on, so you don't spend a lot of time on that site, but rather the 5 sites that can take 20% of the site load and generate massive savings. So it is about assessing their, we call it sort of techno-economical feasibility.
Yeah, so that's another really interesting one because, like you say, as you look at the portfolio of sites and real estate, that's that's going to be a dynamic of itself. Maybe we'll come back to that one a little bit later as well, because I think that'd be interesting to kind of come back to that. So I guess if one of the questions that we kind of had after the last one was about what are maybe some of the key factors that can contribute to success, shall we say, in looking at on-site solar, and maybe what some of the key pitfalls are. Do you feel you could pick out a few things that maybe just share the benefit of your experience with what I mean? I know we talked a bit about things like partnerships and alignments and I completely agree with this one. Starting up front and getting things done up front before you get too far along and spend a lot of money and making sure it all works and things like that. But I really would be interested to hear the benefit of what you've seen in projects, about what those kind of common success factors are.
Definitely. I think, yeah, the one is obviously the one we just talked about, sort of getting those right people together early on. So we don't need to spend more time today on that, but I think that is one. Then I think the commercial structure and risk is a second area of importance. And again, just going back to an on-site PPA and how it sort of typically works is, if there's a 15-year on-site PPA, then the customer and corporate wants as much savings, or they want savings from day one and for the full period of time. The developer, most of the time, and that's especially in our case as well, we have 15 years to make the investment and return on investment. So that mutual dependence and understanding of both parties is very important, and that is for all B2B negotiation. It's not different, but understanding each other's sort of sides. But here again, that you mentioned the word partnership, which is something I like for on-site solar. So getting those things right from the beginning is important. So I think when you then negotiate, one of the pitfalls is sort of if you ask for too much from your developer, the PPA price will be higher and you might lose out on savings. So if you, for example, ask them for shortfall in production of the site, or if you ask them for insure the building, I'm taking these extreme examples, but we have been asked for that. So but perhaps more reasonable is what happens if the site does not consume the solar, because a lot of times in Europe today we cannot export. So who takes that volume? Who takes that risk? So that and again, it's not one risk, it's that holistic view on risk. So the mutual dependence and then we can talk about how you find that right developer, but that's a pitfall, and you can get lost in negotiating very heavy LDs, which ultimately might be counterproductive, because the price will increase and the savings will get lost. So that's a big area.
I imagine that on that, I mean, corporates are going to be trying to choose a developer with like kind of credibility, you've done it before, you can show you're doing, you're working on site. I think credibility. I think offsite, there is a degree of credibility. Have these guys built something before? Is it doable? I think on-site, I'd imagine credibility is probably even more crucial because the local team want to be clear that whoever's going to do this work knows what they're doing and everything else. But I also, what I heard from you there was that actually don't ask for everything if you don't need everything. What are the crucial things you need? And what other things might be nice to have if they're offered and they're not massively affecting the price, or they can be done, and what do you not need? Because all of those things that can bundle up and affect the price, and ultimately, as you say, it's you who the off taker who impact the savings.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is kind of true on the highest level that there is, I said mutual dependence, but there's also another sort of aligned incentives, because typically in an on-site PPA, the developer gets paid when it's producing and the corporate generates savings when electricity is produced or stored and dispatched, right? So that should always be the core. Then of course you should have mechanism that sort of protect both party, and you have certain responsibilities within 15 years, but hopefully it can start with that sort of shared incentives. So I think that is sort of a good way to summarize it. And the other, sorry, you go.
No, keep going. Yeah. I was going to say, I think that's a really good thing, because actually it brings together the whole things that we've talked of, the threads, shall we say, of alignment, the alignment, communication, risk sharing, but it actually illustrates how it impacts the commercial part of the deal. It's not just an abstract thing. Actually, getting it right and being aligned and in partnership really brings the commercials to life.
Yeah, and I mean, again, compared to an offsite, there are some other new clauses that you need to assess, right? I mean, because 15 years is 15 years. So, what happens if the site is sold? What happens after the term? What happens? What is the availability guarantee? What if there's a change in developer? There are a few of those things which, again, you have them in an offsite, but here they are very specific, because from a developer perspective, we enter an agreement with a big Fortune 500, and we bet on them paying the electricity bills for 15 years. So hopefully there's no one else. But if there is, we might need to change something because the risk changes.
Yeah. But corporates are obviously generally well placed to bet on themselves for 15 years, because if they can't, that's not why. What are they doing? So that's to me why PPAs work well, because the corporates are well placed to say, yes, I need that, I'm going to do that. But like you say, life changes, things move on. So I suppose it's crucial to examine some of those scenarios at the beginning and say, what happens if we change what we do, or this happens, and understand what the mechanisms are, around that for both sides, I guess.
And I mean, I agree with you, but I think that's also why we also prefer this portfolio approach as well on a strategic level, because even for large corporates, they have, if you look at the 15-year agenda, they also have, depending on their customers, they know that they will invest in the site in France, and the other site in Belgium might not be. So that's, you might want to pick a PPA for one site and not the other, because of their future business or how that evolves. So even from the corporate side, I think that's an angle as well to think about.
Yeah.
With that said, you can still do PPAs, and there might be changes of either developer and corporate.
Yeah. So. To be honest with you, with all of these things, having seen agreements over time, they're all very manageable because the future is the future. You can never nail everything down, shall we say, for a 15-year agreement of any sort, whether it would be a PPA or a lease or anything. But I think actually, to me, where it comes back to is working with a credible partner and having that close partnership. You always feel if something comes up, it can be resolved mutually. And things feel like they're structured. We all know it. We work with partners and people who are good to work with, and we want to do it again. So I can kind of see that thinking. Given, Pascal, that we were just talking about, you just mentioned portfolio there. Is it worth taking a moment to kind of zoom out a bit and maybe just give a view about how you can scale up and maybe make it repeatable across a portfolio in an organization?
Yeah, sure. And then we can also talk about different ways of approaching sort of from an RFP perspective, I think. But
Yes.
again,
Yep.
my philosophy and the Alight's philosophy is again the savings. And I think when a large corporate when they should assess sort of their on-site portfolio, I think when you look at multi-site, that's when if you can cover 20% of many sites, that means you have a real impact in economics and sustainability. So just again, we go back to the why. That's a great start. So and by sort of doing that, it means that you can identify the things we mentioned earlier, like what are the best sites, both from a financial perspective and a technical perspective. And if done well, you can then have one PPA that you then copy paste to the different sites. So you just have one agreement that you then multiply per site. So it goes back to assessing the whole portfolio, and then you create a roadmap based on the sites. And again, it can be different things. Most of the time, when we look at these things together with the corporates, the savings is sort of the leading indicator. And then you might have other things that put them up or down in sort of the agenda. One is, strategic importance of the site. You might have a particular requirement from another sort of from your customer, or you could have sites which you do not own yourself, and you might want to talk to the landlord now, or you want to post them to wave 2. But I think that the way of doing that, because you're spending time, sometimes as much as an offsite, and the way to sort of get value from that is then to have multiple sites.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. It's good sense. So you mentioned it just before we answer that question. You were talking about different ways of approaching an RFP. What are your kind of thoughts in that area?
Many. We can do another one, but I think
okay.
So here again, we have two parties, and we take it from the corporate or from the developer. But I think what is important is a lot of time the customer, they want you to give a price. What's your own, what is your PPA price for 15 years? And there are these two extremes, right? But we can do a desktop analysis. We can look at the site, we can assess it, and we can make a pricing. But if we don't know the load, if we don't know the insurance requirement, if we don't know if they have any particular requirements, they will have many offers, and they might not be apples to apples. So the other extreme is you somehow select one and you let that one develop your site to getting there, which is also not ideal from the customer, that then you're bound to that developer. But I'm leaning a little bit more to do a little bit of work before and a little bit of work sort of making sure you have a bit more information about your site, and then you look for those experienced developers that are out there that can then give a relatively firm price, and then together with a good partner you do the final development. And then that's I think has been successful because then you have a good way of assessing the capabilities of the developers and also reaching a price that is good and a good way there. So just different ways to get there. But if you don't do this prep work or let them develop, you might end up with, this. I gave you this price 4 months ago, but now you didn't tell me all of this, so you're bound with someone who gives a completely high
I think what it says to me is that it's not like, how do I put this? It's not like it's not commoditized like a utility where you just go out and go, I want a supply, and pretty much you'll know the price quoted will be there or thereabouts. There could be some issues that they look at your credit issue, your credit worthiness or something like that, and say, well, you might need to post a bit of credit or whatever. But broadly, you'll be there, and even to a degree with offsite PPAs, there's a degree of as you say, apples and apples. Whereas I feel like what you're saying to me is with on-site, it's very much more bespoke and actually investing in a bit of analysis and some data to inform the way you do your RFP might pay dividends in terms of selecting who you want and getting the best overall deal, and not going down a blind alley of, as you say, finding someone and they go great price and then they say, oh sorry, you wanted this, you didn't tell us that, and you said this, and we right, okay, no, we can't do that price. So it kind of feels like it's more it's a bit more like a bespoke approach rather than just saying, I want on-site solar, tell me your price, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's no like market price for on-site solar. There's no, I have a 4 megawatt roof or a 8 megawatt plot. What is the PPA price for that? But again, that it's worth sort of spending a little bit of that time, given coming back to the pretty hefty savings you can make in today's environment. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm conscious I've taken up a fair bit of your time. I was wondering, I suppose one of the questions I had was like, what do corporates do if they've heard something? But actually, I'm going to wrap it up in a bit of a broader kind of statement and say, what would your closing thoughts be? What do you think corporates should do if they've got questions or they're interested? Are there any other things that are on your mind that you kind of want to share with people?
I think first of all, I think it goes back to the why. Do you have sites that have potential on the ground or even private wire or rooftop? Do I have sites and is there a potential to build solar and storage to help create savings and resilience? And that's the starting point. And if you have that, then there are a multitude of suppliers and that sort of willing to help you. But coming back to your point of it being tailored, I think there is a bit of an exercise from the why to getting a figure that needs to be done. And that's sort of the starting point there, because then once you have a figure, then that makes it so much easier to take it through the organization. I can save this much. Let's talk. So it starts with the savings. That's what I would say.
I think that's very fair. I think it makes sense. Like you say, you're saying, is this a possibility for me? Yes. What are the savings going to be like? And I want to delve into it. So I need to reach out and maybe understand how it works, and then and only then can I kind of get some real numbers. I think that seems like a good approach. Is that a fair way of?
Yeah, I think so. And then I think there are these traditional, do a corporate want to use their own money to invest in that, or do they want a PPA provider? That's one of the things, and a lot of them look for both. And then you start discussing what we said. Who should I involve to get this through? What are important aspects for me when I venture on this journey? But I think the other way here is, you have control of your sites, and that's good for time to market. So we didn't talk that much about the benefit of on-site from that perspective, but generally speaking, these are quick projects because you're not dependent again on a planning decision or grid in a lot of the cases, and you have those things more under control.
What would you say the project's sort of time cycle would be then, Pascal?
For a rooftop, again, it's a bit depending on where you are. If you are in Spain or UK or Poland, but you can definitely do a project when we have done it under a year from inception to energization. I think it's more the PPA negotiations that have been time consuming, but we are talking about a few 1 to 3 months of handling of grid, and a lot of time you don't have a big planning or environmental process if you do either on roof or sometimes on industrial land. So that is taken away. So 12 months is possible.
Yeah, and you compare that with offsite, where even if you assume you've got the same amount of negotiation over a PPA, you could still then be in a position where you're waiting for grid connection, and that can be delayed for reasons beyond their control. You've got the build and everything else, so you could end up being 2 years away or more. And we're seeing CODs now out as it's 2029, 3 years away. So it's almost like if you can get, for me, you've got great savings, and if you want to, you can get it done quickly. It's to bring it back to the beginning, the time is right. Now is a good time to do it.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you agree.
Obviously.
Otherwise, it would be a bit strange. So, what I would say is, if anyone's listening and they kind of want to know more, you are welcome to reach out to Pascal, who I'm sure would help. Alternatively, you can reach out to us or even me here at Zygo and find out what we can do to help with kind of supporting you on the on-site solar journey and tendering and everything else as well. Pascal, it's been an absolute pleasure again. I've learned all sorts of interesting things, as well as just finding it generally interesting and good to have a conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Likewise, a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed, and hopefully you will take up my offer and come on, and we'll figure out what we do for part 3, and we'll do something exciting for that as well.
Sounds like a plan.
Excellent. We'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, everyone.